I'm Tim Bartik, and I'm simply going to talk a little bit briefly about my book, Investing in Kids, and how it relates to these efforts going on in Kalamazoo County. Now, as Rachel mentioned, there are these efforts with the Nurse Family Partnership. There are efforts with Casey Ready Fours to have universal access to preschool. And these efforts have been supported financially and in kind by many local organizations, United Way, PNC, Kalamazoo Community Foundation, Isaac, Great Start Collaborative, and many others. So a fundamental issue is, for such local support for early childhood programs, is the following. Does it make sense from the perspective of a local area? If Kalamazoo invests, does it pay off for Kalamazoo? Or will we provide this early learning and everyone will end up leaving for some other place? I mean, will they end up in some strange foreign place like Columbus, Ohio? So the main argument in my book, Investing in Kids, is that a state or local area's investment in high-quality early childhood programs does pay off from the perspective of that state or local area. What's the payoff? The payoff is enhanced local economic development, which means higher per capita earnings for that area. Because these programs pay off locally, it makes sense for local areas, as they have done in Kalamazoo, to invest in these programs. So early childhood programs promote local economic development primarily by enhancing the development of their child participants so that their work skills are better as adults. Many former child participants will stay in the same local area as adults where they participated in the early childhood programs, and the enhanced quality of the local labor force will attract more and better jobs. Now, contrary to what is sometimes supposed, most Americans stay in their childhood state or local area. About 2/3 of Americans spend most of their working career in the state where they were brought up in childhood. Over half stay in the same metropolitan area. So people will stay. But if we enhance the quality of local labor supply, you might ask, where are these new and better jobs going to come from? They'll be created because that higher quality local labor supply will encourage business startups, business expansions, and new business locations. Now, everyone talks about the business climate, and they mean a lot of things by that. A lot of times they simply mean business taxes, government regulation. Now, certainly business taxes and government regulation are important policy issues. But an area's business climate is at least as importantly determined by the quality of the local labor supply. So in today's global economy, communication and transportation costs have dropped dramatically. Businesses don't have to be located right next to the raw materials. They don't have to be located right next to the consumer markets they serve. They can be anywhere. But they need to be close to skilled labor supply. The quality of workers is perhaps the key source of competitive advantage for businesses in today's economy. Okay, but you might say many factors affect the local labor supply and its quality. Why stress early childhood programs so much? And the key reason is that of all the policies you can consider, and certainly there are many other policies, important K-12 policies and whatever, early childhood programs is one area where we have extremely rigorous evidence of large effects on labor quality per dollar invested. At the same time, we're clearly underinvesting in it. We have excellent social experiments showing that high-quality early childhood programs have very large effects, increasing educational attainment, reducing crime, increasing adult earnings. So in the book, I present this in much more detail, but using these studies, I showed that for each dollar a local area like Kalamazoo invests in these programs, it will end up being returned 2 to 3 times as much. That the present value of the future earnings of local residents, again, we're ignoring those people who, for whatever reason, head off to Columbus, Ohio. Just counting the people who stay in Kalamazoo, local earnings goes up by 2 or 3 times as much. Now, does every early childhood program have these same effects? No, it has to be a high quality program. So that means a program that has a reasonable ratio of children to adult workers, has a good curriculum, and it has sufficient pay to attract quality personnel to the program. But you can achieve quality at reasonable costs. So for example, with high quality preschool, you can achieve that for about $4,500 per year. So it's not necessarily break the bank to pay for these programs. Now, one question I sometimes get asked is, how is it possible for early childhood programs that in some sense you consider relatively modest intervention that has such large, long-run effects? You might think that, okay, maybe this is good for this 4-year-old to be in preschool, but is it really going to have an effect 30 years later? The key, at least from the research, is the effects on the child's so-called soft skills. Now, by soft skills, I mean how the child relates to his or her peers, how the child relates to his teacher, his or her teacher, and also the child's self-confidence and ability to engage in planning. Now, early childhood programs also have important effects on so-called hard skills, by which I mean the things that literacy and math tests measure. The effects on the hard skills, we find, fade somewhat over time. Not completely, they do fade over time. In contrast, if we look at soft skills, those effects actually increase over time. So how does that occur? Well, a child who in preschool learns how to relate better to peers and the teacher, and who learns to have more self-confidence, will do better in kindergarten. This reinforces their self-confidence. It reinforces their social skills. Early learning of soft skills leads to later learning of both soft skills and hard skills. This cycle of learning leading to more learning and kind of building on itself is the key to why what we do at age 4 has these profound effects 30 years later. Because if you talk to any employer, soft skills of the workers is just as important as the so-called hard skills in determining whether that worker is going to be successful on the job. Are they going to take an initiative? Are they going to get along with their coworkers? Are they going to get along with their supervisor? Can they relate to customers? Can they problem solve? Can they plan? Can they be creative? These are all the attributes of someone who's not only a good worker, but as Rachel was saying, can start their own business. Now, one of the issues with early childhood programs is that the benefits are long-term. And we know that our political system, everyone's worried about the next election. That's the way it's set up. So it tends to be short-term oriented. How do we convince a short-term oriented political system to invest for the long term? Well, one argument is that early childhood programs do have many important short-term benefits. I'll just mention one here today. There are more in my book. High-quality early childhood programs can attract adult workers to an area and enhance local property values. For example, we know from numerous research that higher school test scores increase property values. In the book, I calculate that simply from the effect of high-quality preschool on third-grade test scores, we would expect each dollar invested in high-quality preschool to increase property values by about 13 times as much. So there's this big effect because parents value being close to high-quality preschool. Now, this isn't simply a policy wonk argument, and I respect policy wonks because that's what I am. The role of early childhood programs in attracting workers is recognized by many business leaders. For example, recently the Iowa Business Council, which represents the top employers in the state of Iowa, top businesses in the state of Iowa, they testified before the Iowa Senate. There's an ongoing debate in Iowa where there's an attempt to eliminate the state's current preschool program underway. And the Iowa Business Council testified against this bill, and they testified that their members found that the state's preschool program was a key selling point in attracting potential employees from other states. This is what the leading businesses in the state of Iowa are saying about that state's universal preschool program. The other point I would make is we can do what we want to try to sell political leaders on the short-term benefits, and I think they're there. But ultimately, we somehow need to reorient our society's thinking to focus more on the long term. You know, the reality is, unless our nation is willing to invest in the future, we don't really have a bright future. And you know, I'm sure you've heard the cliche that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. And so my book tries to make the economic case for why local areas should be planting trees today by investing in high-quality early childhood programs. But ultimately, it's not up to books like this to really settle this. It's up to grassroots community support, and it's up to visionary community leaders to make these theoretical arguments into reality. And that's precisely why support for early childhood programs from community groups such as Isaac and from the business and community leaders we have here today is so important.